Fluency is not about knowing English. It's about moving without stopping. For years, I believed my problem was vocabulary. I thought I needed more grammar, more practice tests, more lessons. But the real problem wasn't what I knew. It was how I spoke. Every time I opened my mouth, I paused. Not because I didn't understand English, but because I was thinking too much. I was editing myself in real time. I was afraid of mistakes. And those tiny pauses made me look unsure. In America, confidence matters. The way you speak shapes how people see you. If you hesitate, people assume you lack clarity. If you flow, people assume you lead. This is the story of how I trained my mouth to speak English without pausing. Not by memorizing more words, not by becoming perfect, but by building rhythm, confidence, and mental speed. I didn't just learn English. I trained it like a skill. And in 8 chapters, I'll show you exactly how I did it. Chapter 1. The day I realized pausing was my real problem. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 29 years old and I live in Dallas, Texas. If you hear me speak today, you might assume I've always been fluent. People often tell me, "You speak so clearly," or "You sound confident." What they don't know is that I used to struggle every single time I spoke, not because I didn't know English, but because I paused. A lot. The problem wasn't my vocabulary. It wasn't grammar. It wasn't even pronunciation. It was hesitation. I would begin a sentence with energy, so what I'm trying to say is, and then suddenly my brain would freeze. I'd search for the perfect word. I'd worry about structure. And in those few seconds of silence, I could feel people judging me. In American culture, pauses feel bigger than they are. Confidence is often measured by flow. If you hesitate too long, people assume you're unsure. I noticed this in meetings, during job interviews, even during small talk. I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't deliver it smoothly. One night after a presentation at work, I sat alone in my car replaying every awkward pause. I had prepared the content. I understood the topic. But when it was my turn to speak, my thoughts raced while my mouth slowed down. That's when I realized something powerful. My issue wasn't knowledge. It was performance. Speaking is physical. It's muscle memory. And I had never trained it. That night I made a decision. I wasn't going to study more English. I was going to train my mouth to move without fear. I would treat fluency like fitness. Daily reps. Consistency. No excuses. That decision changed everything. Chapter 2. I stopped studying English and started practicing out loud. Most people try to improve their English the traditional way. They buy grammar books. They memorize vocabulary lists. They watch tutorials. I did all of that. And yet, when it came time to speak, I still paused. That's when I understood a hard truth. Knowledge lives in the brain, but fluency lives in the mouth. So I made a simple but uncomfortable change. I started speaking out loud every single day, even when I was alone. In the beginning, it felt strange. I would wake up and narrate my morning routine. I'd say things like, "I'm getting out of bed. I feel tired, but I need to start my day. I'm walking to the kitchen. I'm making coffee. The smell is strong and smooth." I forced myself not to stop. If I didn't know a word, I described it differently. No silence allowed. At first, my sentences were slow and clumsy, but something important happened. I stopped trying to sound perfect. I focused on continuity instead. I realized that native speakers don't always choose perfect words. They choose movement. They keep talking. So I created a rule: never stop the sentence. If I made a grammar mistake, I ignored it and continued. If I forgot a word, I replaced it. If I felt embarrassed, I kept speaking anyway. Every morning for 10 minutes. Every evening for 10 minutes. No skipping. Then I started recording myself. Listening back was painful. I heard every filler word, every every unnecessary pause, but instead of feeling ashamed, I treated it like game footage. Athletes review their performance. So did I. I timed my pauses. 3 seconds, 4 seconds, sometimes longer. And I noticed something surprising. Most pauses weren't because I didn't know what to say. They were because I was afraid of saying it wrong. Fear was the real enemy. So I gave myself permission to be imperfect. For 30 days, I banned the word sorry from my vocabulary. No more apologizing for small mistakes, no more shrinking my voice. The less I chased perfection, the smoother my speech became. Then I practiced storytelling. Every day, I would choose a random memory and speak about it for 3 full minutes without stopping. No script. No preparation. Just flow. At first, I struggled to reach 1 minute, but after 3 weeks, something shifted. My thoughts began organizing themselves faster. My mouth followed automatically. I wasn't translating anymore. I wasn't overthinking grammar. I was communicating, and that's when I understood the truth. Fluency isn't about knowing more. It's about hesitating less. Chapter 3. I trained my brain to think in English, not translate. The biggest breakthrough in my fluency journey happened when I realized I was translating everything. Every sentence I spoke had to travel through a mental filter. I would think in my first language, then translate it into English, then adjust the grammar, then finally speak. That delay created hesitation. And hesitation created pauses. If you've ever felt like your brain is running while your mouth is buffering, you know exactly what I mean. I understood something important. Translation is slow. Thinking is fast. If I wanted to speak without pausing, I had to eliminate the middle step. I had to think directly in English. At first, that sounded impossible. How do you just switch thinking languages? But I started small. I began labeling everything around me in English. When I walked into a room, I mentally described it. There's a wooden table in the center. The light is soft. The air feels cool. I forced my thoughts to stay in English, even if the sentences were simple. Simplicity was the key. I stopped trying to think in complex sentences. I focused on short, direct thoughts. Instead of thinking, this situation is creating a significant amount of pressure for me, I would think, this feels stressful. Clean. Fast. Clear. Then I changed my environment. I consumed English daily, podcasts during workouts, interviews during my commute, American talk shows at night, not to memorize words, but to absorb rhythm. I paid attention to how Americans connect ideas, how they transition between thoughts, how they react naturally in conversations. I noticed something powerful. Native speakers don't always speak perfectly structured sentences. They think out loud. They adjust mid-sentence. They repeat themselves, but they rarely freeze. That gave me permission to relax. To strengthen my thinking speed, I practiced rapid response drills. I would ask myself random questions and answer immediately without preparation. Questions like, what would you do if you had $1 million? Or describe your best friend. I gave myself no more than 1 second to start speaking. This trained my brain to respond instead of analyze. Over time, something shifted. My inner voice started changing. I began dreaming in English. I began reacting in English. When something surprised me, my automatic response wasn't translation anymore. It was direct speech. That's when I knew I was no longer learning English. I was living it. And when you live in the language, pauses disappear naturally. Chapter 4. I mastered the power of thought blocks. One of the biggest turning points in my journey happened when I realized I was speaking word by word instead of idea by idea. That might sound small, but it changed everything. When you speak word by word, your brain has to work overtime. It searches for vocabulary, checks grammar, adjusts pronunciation, and monitors how you sound all at the same time. That overload creates hesitation. And hesitation creates pauses. I used to build sentences like I was assembling something without instructions. I'd grab one word, then search for the next, then stop to make sure it was correct. The result wasn't terrible English. It was broken rhythm. In American communication culture, rhythm matters more than perfection. People respond to flow. If your ideas come out in smooth, connected chunks, you sound confident, even if your grammar isn't flawless. But if your delivery feels fragmented, people sense uncertainty. I realized that I didn't need more vocabulary. I needed better structure. That's when I discovered what I call thought blocks. A thought block is a complete idea packaged into one smooth unit. Instead of thinking in individual words, I trained myself to think in full idea chunks. For example, instead of saying, "I think maybe we should try something different," I trained myself to say, "I think we should try something different, because this approach isn't working." That's one block, one idea, one breath. When you speak in blocks, your brain relaxes because it isn't scrambling to construct the sentence piece by piece. To build this skill, I started collecting powerful sentence starters, phrases like, "The reason I believe that is," "From my experience," "What I've noticed is," "One thing I've learned is," and "The main problem here is." I memorized them as full units, not separate words. These phrases became mental anchors. Whenever I entered a conversation and felt my mind starting to freeze, I would grab one of those blocks. The moment I started speaking with a structured opening, the rest of the idea flowed more naturally. I also changed the way I practiced speaking. Instead of random talking, I gave myself organized mini-speeches. I would choose a simple topic, discipline, leadership, confidence, and force myself to speak about it in 3 clear points. First, I would introduce the idea. Then I would explain point 1 with an example, then point 2, then point 3. Finally, I would wrap it up with a short conclusion. At first, this felt mechanical, but over time, my brain began organizing thoughts automatically. When someone asked me a question in real life, I didn't panic anymore. My mind immediately searched for structure instead of vocabulary. Another powerful shift was understanding the difference between freezing and breathing. I used to think that any pause was bad. But that's not true. Strong speakers pause all the time. The difference is that their pauses happen after complete ideas, not in the middle of confusion. A confident pause feels intentional. It feels controlled. An uncertain pause feels like the speaker got lost. So I trained myself to finish the block first. Then, breathe. That small adjustment made my speech feel stronger overnight. I studied great communicators closely. I watched interviews with CEOs, political debates, keynote speeches, and panel discussions. I noticed a pattern. They rarely speak in long, complicated sentences. They deliver clear idea blocks, one after another. Even when they adjust mid-sentence, they keep the block intact. They don't abandon the idea halfway through. That observation gave me confidence. Fluency wasn't about speaking fast. It was about delivering complete thoughts. To strengthen this skill, I practiced something I call idea expansion. I would take one simple statement like, "Success requires discipline," and expand it into a full block. Success requires discipline because without consistent effort, talent alone isn't enough to create long-term results. Then I would add an example. Then a short story. This trained my brain to stretch ideas instead of stopping after one short sentence. The more I expanded thoughts, the less I hesitated. Something else changed too. My listening improved. When you train yourself to think in blocks, you start recognizing them in other people's speech. Conversations became easier to follow. I could predict where someone was going with their point. That made responding faster. And faster responses meant fewer awkward silences. Over time, speaking in thought blocks became automatic. I didn't need to consciously grab sentence starters anymore. My brain naturally grouped ideas together. Instead of searching for words, I focused on meaning. Instead of worrying about grammar, I focused on clarity. And clarity created confidence. The biggest lesson I learned in this chapter of my journey is simple: fluency is not speed, and it's not perfection. Fluency is organized thinking delivered smoothly. When your ideas are structured, your mouth doesn't panic. When your thoughts come in blocks, your speech flows naturally. Once I mastered thought blocks, my pauses didn't disappear completely, but they transformed. They became strategic. They became powerful. And for the first time, when I spoke in meetings or presentations, I didn't feel like I was chasing words. I felt like I was leading ideas. Same way to Chapter 5 DAW. Chapter 5. I reduced fear by increasing exposure. For a long time, I believed my pauses were caused by a lack of vocabulary or speed. But the deeper I went into my journey, the more I realized something uncomfortable. My real problem wasn't English. It was fear. Fear of sounding wrong. Fear of being judged. Fear of looking less intelligent. Every time I opened my mouth in a group setting, there was a small voice in my head whispering, "Don't mess this up." And that pressure slowed everything down. Fear creates hesitation. Hesitation creates pauses. In American culture, communication is often tied to confidence. People don't just listen to your words, they read your energy. If you sound unsure, they assume you are unsure. And when I paused too much, even if my ideas were strong, the delivery weakened the message. I knew I had to attack the fear directly, not indirectly. So I made a decision: instead of avoiding speaking situations, I would increase them. I would expose myself to more conversations, not fewer. At first, I started small. I forced myself to initiate tiny interactions every day. At the coffee shop, instead of just saying thank you, I added, "How's your morning going?" At the grocery store, I would make light comments about how busy it was. These weren't deep conversations, but they were repetitions. And repetition builds comfort. Comfort reduces fear. The first few days felt awkward. My heart would beat a little faster before speaking. I would overthink simple sentences. But nothing bad happened. No one laughed. No one criticized my grammar. Most people responded warmly. That's when I understood something important. Most of the fear existed only in my head. The reality was much kinder than my imagination. After I got comfortable with short exchanges, I raised the difficulty level. I joined discussion groups and networking events. Living in a big city gave me access to community meetups, professional gatherings, and small workshops. The first time I walked into one of those rooms, I almost turned around. Everyone seemed confident. Everyone seemed fluent. My mind immediately started comparing. But I stayed. I introduced myself. My voice wasn't perfect. I paused once or twice. But I didn't run away. And that single decision changed my confidence more than months of solo practice ever could. Exposure is powerful because it gives you evidence. Every time you survive a conversation, you collect proof that you are capable. Confidence is built on evidence, not motivation. I also learned to reframe mistakes. Before, if I made a grammar error, I would replay it in my head for hours. That mental replay increased my anxiety for the next conversation. So I changed the rule. Instead of asking, "Did I speak perfectly?" I started asking, "Did I communicate clearly?" That shift reduced pressure instantly. Communication became the goal, not perfection. Another strategy that helped me was deliberate discomfort. Once a week, I challenged myself to speak in a slightly intimidating environment. It could be asking a question during a meeting, sharing an opinion in a group discussion, or volunteering to present a small update. These moments pushed me out of my comfort zone. And every time I survived them, my fear shrank a little more. Fear thrives in avoidance. It weakens in exposure. Something surprising happened after a few months. I stopped thinking about how I sounded. I started focusing on what I wanted to say. That shift is powerful. When your attention moves from self-monitoring to message delivery, fluency increases naturally. You pause less because you're no longer trying to edit every word in real time. I also paid attention to how native speakers handle mistakes. They correct themselves casually. They restart sentences without embarrassment. They laugh at small slips. They don't freeze. Watching that behavior gave me permission to relax. I didn't need to be flawless to belong in the conversation. Gradually, my body stopped reacting with tension. My breathing became steadier. My voice became stronger. The fear that once controlled my speech started fading into the background. And with less fear, there were fewer mental blocks. With fewer mental blocks, there were fewer pauses. The biggest realization from this chapter of my journey is simple. Fluency grows in real conversations, not in isolation. You can practice alone to build skill, but you must face people to build confidence. Exposure turns theory into reality. It turns knowledge into experience. By increasing the number of conversations in my life, I didn't just improve my English. I changed my relationship with fear. I stopped seeing speaking as a performance. I started seeing it as connection. And when connection becomes the focus, hesitation loses its power. The more I showed up, the less I froze. The less I froze, the more I flowed. And that's when speaking English stopped feeling like a test and started feeling natural. Chapter 6. I trained my voice like an instrument. At some point in my journey, I realized something most people ignore. Fluency isn't only mental, it's physical. You can think clearly and still sound hesitant if your voice isn't trained. Your breath, your mouth muscles, your pacing, they all affect how smoothly you speak. And for years, I had never trained them. I expected my voice to perform confidently without ever practicing it deliberately. That changed when I started treating my voice like an instrument. Think about singers. They don't just memorize lyrics. They train their vocal cords. They practice scales. They control breathing. Public speakers and actors rehearse out loud, not silently. Yet when it comes to English fluency, most people only read silently or study grammar. That doesn't prepare your voice for real conversation. So I added a new daily habit, reading out loud. Not quietly, not in my head. Out loud with full voice. At first, it felt uncomfortable. I sounded stiff. My pacing was inconsistent. Sometimes I ran out of breath in the middle of a sentence, which forced me to pause awkwardly. That's when I understood something important. Many of my pauses weren't mental. They were physical. I wasn't breathing properly. I began practicing diaphragmatic breathing. Instead of shallow chest breaths, I trained myself to breathe deeply from my diaphragm. I would inhale slowly for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, then exhale steadily. This built control. When you control your breath, you control your pace, and when you control your pace, you reduce panic pauses. Breathing gave my voice stability. Then I worked on pacing. I noticed that when I felt nervous, I either spoke too fast or too slow. Both created problems. Speaking too fast made me trip over words. Speaking too slow made me overthink. So I practiced reading at a steady, conversational speed. Not rushed, not dragging, just natural rhythm. I also paid attention to articulation. Sometimes hesitation happens because your mouth isn't used to certain sounds. English has combinations that can feel unnatural if you didn't grow up with them. So I practiced difficult sound patterns repeatedly. Words like particularly, entrepreneur, and responsibility. I exaggerated pronunciation at first. Clear, sharp, precise. Over time, that clarity became automatic. Another powerful technique I used was shadowing. I would play short clips of native speakers, interviews, podcasts, speeches, and immediately repeat what they said, matching their tone and rhythm as closely as possible. Not memorizing, not translating, just copying in real time. This exercise trained my timing. It improved my natural flow more than I expected. Shadowing forced my brain and mouth to work together at full speed. At first, I struggled to keep up. I paused. I stumbled. But after weeks of practice, my mouth adapted. My tongue moved faster. My transitions became smoother. I wasn't just learning words, I was learning rhythm. I also recorded myself regularly. Listening back was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. I noticed patterns. Sometimes my voice dropped at the end of sentences, making me sound unsure. Sometimes I rushed through important ideas. Awareness allowed adjustment. And adjustment created improvement. One unexpected benefit of training my voice was confidence. When your voice sounds steady, your mind feels steady. There's a psychological connection between tone and belief. If you sound unsure, you begin to feel unsure. But when your voice carries strength and clarity, your confidence rises automatically. I also practiced speaking while standing up. Body posture affects airflow and projection. Sitting hunched over reduces breath support. Standing tall opens your chest and improves vocal delivery. Small physical changes made a big difference in how I sounded. Over time, speaking became less exhausting. In the beginning, conversations drained me because I was forcing every sentence. After training my voice consistently, speech felt lighter, more automatic, less mechanical. The biggest lesson from this stage of my journey is this. Fluency isn't just about what's happening in your brain. It's about what your body can handle. If your breathing is weak, your pacing unstable, and your articulation unclear, pauses will appear no matter how strong your vocabulary is. But when your breath is controlled, your rhythm steady, and your voice trained, your speech flows naturally. I stopped seeing English as only a language to understand. I started seeing it as a performance skill to practice physically. And once my voice caught up with my thoughts, the pauses became smaller. The flow became smoother. And for the first time, speaking didn't feel like effort. It felt like expression. Chapter 7. I built a no-excuse speaking routine. By the time I reached this stage of my journey, I had learned powerful techniques. I knew how to think in English. I knew how to use thought blocks. I had reduced fear through exposure. I had trained my voice and breathing. But none of that would have mattered if I wasn't consistent. Skill without repetition fades. Confidence without routine disappears. That's when I realized I needed a system, something structured, something non-negotiable. So I built a no-excuse speaking routine. Not something complicated, not something unrealistic, just something I could commit to every single day. I decided on 30 minutes. That was it. 30 focused minutes dedicated only to speaking. No scrolling, no multitasking, no passive listening. Active speaking. I broke it into 3 parts. The first 10 minutes were for narration. I would talk about what I was doing, what I was planning, or what I was thinking. If I was cooking, I described the process. If I was preparing for work, I explained my schedule out loud. The goal wasn't creativity. The goal was movement. I wanted my mouth to get used to forming sentences without interruption. The second 10 minutes were for storytelling. I would pick one memory or topic and speak about it continuously. It could be a childhood experience, a mistake I made, a lesson I learned, or an opinion about something trending. I forced myself to organize my thoughts in real time. If I ran out of things to say, I expanded the idea instead of stopping. I added details, emotions, examples. This strengthened my ability to think on my feet. The final 10 minutes were for rapid response drills. I created a list of random questions and answered them immediately. No preparation. Questions like, what does success mean to you? If you could live anywhere, where would it be? What's a challenge you overcame? I gave myself 1 second to begin speaking. This eliminated overthinking. It trained my brain to respond instead of analyze. The key to this routine wasn't intensity, it was consistency. Some days I felt motivated. Some days I didn't. Some mornings I was confident. Other days I felt slow and distracted. But I made a rule: no skipping. Even on bad days, I showed up. Even if my speech felt messy, I completed the 30 minutes. Discipline built momentum. After a few weeks, I noticed something subtle but powerful. My mouth didn't resist speaking anymore. It felt normal, natural, automatic. The same way brushing your teeth feels automatic because you've done it thousands of times. Fluency started to shift from effort to habit. I also tracked my progress. Once a week, I recorded a 5-minute reflection about my week. I didn't script it. I just spoke. Then I saved the recording. After 3 months, I listened to the first one again. The difference shocked me. The early version of me hesitated more, searched more, paused longer. The newer version sounded clearer, calmer, more structured. Progress is hard to see daily, but over time, it becomes undeniable. Another powerful element of my routine was removing perfectionism. During those 30 minutes, I wasn't allowed to stop and correct myself repeatedly. If I made a mistake, I kept going. This trained mental resilience. In real conversations, you don't get to restart every sentence. You have to continue. My routine mirrored real life. I also made the environment distraction-free. Phone on airplane mode. Door closed. No background noise. Speaking requires mental energy, and if your attention is divided, your fluency suffers. Over time, the routine did something deeper than improve my English. It strengthened my identity. I stopped seeing myself as someone trying to become fluent. I started seeing myself as someone who speaks every day. That identity shift increased confidence naturally. When you show up daily, you begin to believe in your ability. The most important lesson from this chapter of my journey is simple. Talent doesn't create fluency. Routine does. Motivation fades. Inspiration fluctuates. But systems create results. Fluency is not built in one breakthrough moment. It's built in quiet, repetitive sessions when no one is watching. It's built on days when you don't feel like practicing, but do it anyway. It's built through accumulated effort. By committing to a no-excuse routine, I removed the randomness from my progress. I stopped hoping to improve. I started training to improve. And once speaking became part of my daily structure, hesitation lost its control over me. Because when you practice something every day, your brain stops asking, "Can I do this?" and starts saying, "This is who I am." Chapter 8. The day I spoke without thinking. There's a moment in every growth journey when you realize you've crossed an invisible line. For me, it happened during a high-pressure presentation at work. 6 months after committing to daily fluency training, I was asked to speak in front of senior managers and colleagues, around 50 people in the room. The old version of me would have panicked. I would have memorized every sentence and still feared freezing mid-speech. But this time, I prepared only key points using structured thought blocks. No script, just clarity. When I started speaking, something shifted. I wasn't thinking about grammar or searching for vocabulary. I was focused on the message. My ideas flowed naturally. My breathing stayed steady. The pauses I used were intentional, not fearful. I wasn't monitoring myself, I was communicating. Afterward, a colleague told me, "You're a natural speaker." I smiled because I knew the truth. I wasn't natural. I was trained. That moment represented freedom. Freedom from overthinking and fear. Fluency didn't come from learning more words. It came from daily practice, exposure, structure, and repetition. Speaking without pausing isn't about speed. It's about trust. Trusting your preparation and trusting yourself to keep going. Fluency isn't a talent. It's a habit built through consistent action.